So as we start into the video, what you're going to do is you're going to take your template and you're going to put it on top of the material that you're using for the boot. In this particular case, I was using a white fabric that was going to be turned into the boots. And all I'm doing here is putting my template down onto the fabric I'm going to be using and tracing around it. You want to be careful. You know, you don't want to let the marker bleed over or anything. So, but once you have that, so what I'm doing here is I know that the calf muscle is going to be a little bit longer than my template, so I marked out the measurement for that, and then all I do is slide over the template to match the distance. I believe it was like 2 inches on this one, and then you can just continue on your line and bring it on down and connect. So that's one half, and then you're going to have to do the other half. So you cut this one out, and because you want both of them to be the same, you'll use this now as your next template for the other leg. So I have the video kind of sped up here a little bit, but all you're going to want to do is cut this one out. And like I said, because you want it to be symmetrical, you want to use the same exact one that you're going to be using for your left leg as for your right leg. So I trim all this stuff off so that I'm sure that all the material and stuff lines up exactly how I want it to. And we're going to be continuing on here. All right. So all I did was turned it over. And it doesn't really matter if the opening is going to be, there's like a straight edge and there's more of a curved edge. It really doesn't matter which one you use. It's not like a left and a right. I mean, you could do it that way, but you don't necessarily have to. Because once you sew them together, it's really the size that you want. And as long as it's there, it all comes together and fits your leg pretty well. So all I'm doing here is cutting out the other side for the boot pattern. And again, these will all be symmetrical because you based it off of the first one that you did. So I'm just trimming off the top, and then you'll have two symmetrical patterns for which to start your boots. And we're going to be moving on here shortly. Okay, now that's done, we're going to prep the shoes. And the way that I do that is I used loafers for these, and I just used 2 coats of whatever color paint I want the base of the shoes to be, in this case white. And I just take it to my spray booth and spray the bottoms and give them some time to dry. You want to make sure you use proper ventilation here when you're using spray paint and whatnot. These original shoes used to be brown and the base used to be black, so you really want to make sure you get a good solid 2 coats on there and let them dry. All right, so now that we have the boots ready to go, what we do now is we have to get the fabric onto the shoe. And the way that I do that is I cut a general size out for the shoe, and I use push pins to put the material onto the shoe so that I can see where it's going to hit and where it's going to cover. And the push pins allow enough tension that will allow you to draw a line, and you'll see that shortly. What you're seeing right now is I'm covering the shoe. I want it to be not super tight, but you want to try to get rid of all the wrinkles and whatnot so that even though the material will stretch a little bit, you don't want to have wrinkles on the finished product. So all I do here is I'm working around the push pins. I'm pushing them in from one side, and then I move over to the other side, and then I move up to the front. And what this allows you to do is it just gives you a good solid, approach to have the material on there so that you can draw the line. And all I'm doing here is just putting some push pins through, and they go through pretty much any shoe, so you don't have to have a special shoe or anything for this. So what will happen is I almost have it all attached. You will have to make some adjustments, and this is the most important part, because if you're able to do this part correctly, you can it will make the rest of the task so much easier, because you don't want to have to go back and try to make a correction on this shoe, and then if you're going to use this pattern for the other shoe, then you have to make the correction on that one. So it's definitely best to spend the time and make sure that you have everything down and correct in these early phases, because you don't have to go back. It'll save you so much time, so much money trying to redo it or modify it. Whereas if you just put the time in now, you can get it done. So what I do is I split right up the back up to the like the tongue. Now these shoes that I'm using are loafers that don't have any knots or anything. So you'll see how that comes into play shortly. So now I'm taking a permanent marker and I'm just drawing the line where I can see where the shoe meets the sole. And this is to ensure that, you know, once you put the fabric on, that every part of the shoe is covered. So it really doesn't matter what color shoe you use, because once you have the painting done and you put the fabric on and you follow this method, then it will cover all of the shoe that's visible. And it really does create a pretty good look once it's all said and done. So I just go all around the shoe, and there's a slight indentation that you can see once there's some tension on the shoe. And it's relatively easy to do. You might have to try it a couple times or change the tension on it, but you'll eventually get it. So once you have all the line drawn around where the shoe meets the sole of the shoe, take all of your push pins out like I'm doing here, and we're going to cut that pattern out. And you can see there's a slice up the middle where it meets the tongue. I'm not sure exactly what that thing's called, but so we're going to cut this out, and we'll use this as the template for the other shoe. Now we're going to have to flip it upside down because left feet and right feet are built differently. So as I move on to that part, you'll see that it'll be a plain pattern, and it won't be the chainmail print pattern that's on this one. So again, you can use pretty much any material for this. I definitely prefer a 4-way stretch material because it's very easy to work with, and the contact cement, which I'll show you in a bit, really adheres to it really well without bleeding through. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to flip that pattern around, and we're going to create the other shoe, because your two shoes should match. And you know, as long as they're identical shoes and the same size, I'm not sure why you would have a different size. Maybe that's possible, but you want to make sure that you can use the same pattern. And like I said, if you do it correctly the first time, you really don't have to worry too much about any variances or anything like that. And so you want to put the time in to make sure it's done correctly. Make sure that your pattern is really flat, and then just carefully trace around it. Sometimes the material can move, so you want to do this slowly. This video is kind of sped up here a little bit, so you do want to make sure that you take your time and you do this very slowly, because it's very easy to make a mistake if the pattern shifts and you have to move it back into place. Okay, so now that we have the pattern made and cut, what we're going to do is we're going to adhere it to the shoe. And I use barge contact cement, and I'm just simply brushing it right along where the shoe meets the sole of the shoe. And you want to make sure that you don't get too much, if any, contact cement on the white part that's going to be showing after this is done. I'm taking my time. Again, this video is sped up, and it really doesn't look like it, but I've been doing this for a while. I'm taking my time, and I'm brushing probably about an inch away and working the contact cement up to that line. I'm not just layering it in there. So what I typically do is I'll do like maybe half of the shoe with the contact cement, and you let it dry. And the way contact cement works is once it becomes tacky to almost dry, it'll stick to itself really well. And so I highly recommend using either barge or Wellwood, but I definitely prefer barge. And I'm putting it on the shoe pattern here, and we're going to let that dry momentarily. And then once that's done, so I kind of got ahead of myself here, and as the front part of the shoe is drying, I figure, well, I can just do the back. I mean, you can do whatever works best for you, however much time you have. You can space this out over a day or so, but I typically like to get these things done as soon as possible. So I'm doing the rest of the shoe here, and then next I'll be doing the rest of the boot pattern. And it kind of helps because the contact cement won't connect to the other contact cement on the shoe if it's not completely cured yet on whichever material. So it kind of gives you, it's like a time delayed thing. And so now the front part of the shoe should be ready to go. You don't have to wait too long, but test it out and see what works for you and the materials that you're using. But what I do, I start in the beginning, or in the front, and I just slowly start to work those in. You want to take your time because the fronts of the shoes are the most visible things that anyone will see. And obviously the entire shoe would be great if it all went flawlessly, but it doesn't always happen that way. But you do want to make sure you start in the front of the shoe. If you want to make any mistakes, make it in the back. But we're going to be going over how to attach the back and whatnot here momentarily. So all I'm really doing is I'm just working it in there with my fingers, taking my time. You will see a little bit of a wrinkle, but those are going to come out once we attach the back. It'll all pull together, and then we connect everything inside the shoe. But you do want to take your time with this. If you make a mistake, you can use some barge thinner and try to get the material off, but hopefully it's not too big of a mistake. But you just want to take your time, go around. You do want to pull it a little bit to keep that tension on there, but you don't want to pull it so much that it's pulling off of other areas. And with the contact cement, that's really not a problem. So you just want to take your time. And I went the whole way around to the back, and I'm going around the edges one more time with my finger to make sure everything's adhered. And typically what I do is I'll take a pen, and I'll just, without it being clicked, you don't want the ink, and I'll just go around and make sure that it's in all of the little crevices and cracks and everything, and make sure that everything is connected properly. And these kind of little details go a long way for authenticity and how it looks overall. So now I have that one done. You won't see this because I'll do the other shoe in the meantime, but I'm going to be switching over to do the other shoe the exact same way. So for the back of the shoe, all I do is I take one of the flaps and I'll cut it right up the middle. I didn't really get a good video, and so that there's a straight line there. And I want to make sure that I have enough of an overlap on the other material so that it covers the entire shoe. But you just want to make sure that you have a solid line so that you can match up the back of the boot once you're all said and done. And all I'm doing here is just adding a little more contact cement on the underside of the one and then the overside of the other, so that so that those two can be connected. And again, this helps with the cleanness of the look once it's all said and done. So I let that dry. We come back, and now I'm just attaching the shoe. And that's why I really recommend using barge contact cement. It's a very excellent product, and it does its job remarkably well. And it's almost foolproof. You just have to take your time and learn how to use it, because it can be frustrating at times. So what I'm going to do here is I just clip a little bit so that it goes right up to the tongue of the shoe, and I'm cutting out some, I don't know the actual names of these. I call them darts. That could be it or not. I'm not sure. But I'm just cutting some darts so that it's easier to fold the pattern into the shoe. And all I do here is I'll take some contact cement and put it all around the inside of the shoe so that we can connect those darts, and it'll create a clean edge for the other part to be sewn onto. So you have the boot part and you have the shoe part of the boot, and I'm going to show you momentarily how to connect those two and how to make an almost invisible line. I mean, anytime you're making something, there's going to be some kind of a line if there's two pieces, but we do our best to minimize that line that's seen. So all I'm doing here, again, is just putting some contact cement on the inside, and then a little bit on each of the tabs. And I save the back right one for last, because that'll be like the crown on all of the other ones. It's the one that kind of covers like the back. So whenever I start this, and you'll see, I start from, I believe, the left side and just work my way around. So there's really no one way to do this. This is just the way that I found is best to do it. I've used a lot of different adhesives. I've tried super glue. I've tried goo. I can't remember the name of it right now. It's whatever they use to put shoes together. Shoe goo or something like that. But contact cement has by far been the best. So now I just let that dry for a second and come back, and these things will adhere very strongly. And you just work your way around the shoe, and you want to make sure that the top of it is very clean, because again, we will be connecting the boot portion of the boot, like the leg portion, once this is all said and done. So the other tabs are done now, and I put a little bit on the inside of where this final tab is going to go. And again, it's just to make sure that the back of it is cleaned up. Make sure you take your time, and don't rush the process. Just follow it, and it always comes out cleanly for me every time. I'm by no means an expert. I've made numerous mistakes, which is why I'm kind of to the point now where I have these tips and tricks and whatnot to share, because that way you won't have to go and make all of those mistakes that I made. So here's the final portion of the shoe itself. It's all dry, and we're going to go ahead and attach that final piece. And once you're done, you can take a look and make sure that the inside looks clean and the outside is there's no extra contact cement anywhere. Nothing's popping out. You just want to make sure that everything is connected properly. Make sure it has strong bonds. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go over how to attach the boot to the shoe. And the important thing here is I'm checking the width of the ankles. So as you can see, it's 4.5 inches, which means this person has a 9-inch ankle. And you want to make sure that that you have the right side up. I've never had an issue with it because this calf's going to be a certain size. But again, you want to make sure that the measurements are correct before you start attaching anything, because you will have to go back and do rework, or you'll fix it, and that could be an expensive process if you sent the material away to be printed or a special kind of material or whatnot. But I take these to my seamstress, and you can see what it looks like on the inside out. She puts an invisible zipper on, and what that'll do is that'll help put your foot into the shoe once you're ready to put the costume on. And it's pretty much invisible. You'll see a little tab there for the zipper, but you can put your hand through there and show you how it works. But whenever you're putting it on, it definitely helps to have your ankle out, like your heel out, and otherwise you would be ripping the shoe. So whenever we put the boot top onto the shoe, I fold a little bit of it down so that it creates a clean line. And all I do here is I have the thread, and I threaded it up through the front of the shoe to get started. Now there's a little bit of material on the front of the shoe that you can go through, and it's very helpful because otherwise you would be going through leather. So all I do is I line up the back here, fold it over a little bit so that I can find the center, and then I just take the thread and put it up through the center of the front of the boot portion. And whenever you're doing this, again, I can't overemphasize this enough. Take your time. You don't want to do this quickly and realize that the zipper is actually on the side, when you really wanted it on the back. It's a fairly simple process to follow. But once you have that and you turn it over, it will line up with the front of the shoe where you want it to go. And again, you just keep it folded over and continue. You just pull up a little bit on the shoe portion, put the needle through, and then put it through your folded over part of the boot portion. Now there are times when it's a little bit difficult to get through some of these materials due to some of the prints that are on there. And what I typically do is I'll use a pair of needle nose pliers or a pair of little pliers, and I will I'll use it to push the needle through or to push the needle in, depending on if it's difficult or not. The areas that are most difficult are usually in the back of the shoe, because that's where the majority of the material is whenever we were creating the shoe inside. So again, just take your time, and if you do this part correctly, it will create. There will be a line. And if you use a pattern, you'll see a difference or a variance in the pattern. You can take your time and try to line those up if you want. I've never done that, but it's always worked out fairly well for me. Okay, so now we have the shoe attached to the boot portion of it, and the line's, pretty good, pretty solid. It's definitely on there. I kind of sped through it so that you don't have to watch me sew the whole thing. So now that we have the boot and the shoe attached, what we're going to do is we're going to, I guess I explained that I was using the needle nose pliers there. It can be a little bit difficult, and don't push with your finger on the needle. But once you have that done, if you're going to be attaching boot trim to the top to separate it from the rest of the costume, what I do next is I'll take a piece of the trim that I'm going to be using, and I'll just take a permanent marker, and you just lay down the trim that you're going to use, and I trace the outside of the boot so that you have the maximum amount of material to use to sew to the suit itself. So all I'm doing here is I'm just tracing the pattern of the actual trim that I'm going to use, and once you do that, just clean it up a little bit, make sure my lines are correct, and then I'll take out the centerpiece. And again, it could vary depending on which kind of style you want to use, or maybe you don't want to use any at all. So I'm cutting out the center, and then I'll fold it onto itself so that each of the sides are equal. So folded everything up, and now I got to get it onto the side I can cut. You want to stay above the invisible zipper because you don't want to have to redo that piece. So inside here, I can feel with my finger where that is. So I'm definitely staying away from that. And all I'm doing is just cutting a slight downward angle. And I want to make sure that I don't tag that invisible zipper at the end. Once you've done that, you will have the boot pattern at the top. And you can see that the back of the boot should meet about the front of where that peak is. And this definitely goes down at a downward angle. It's not a straight across boot. And you'll see that once you line the fabric up with the trim itself, it'll fit pretty well. The trim that I use is made of latex, so it's kind of stretchy and can be modified. But once you've done that, that's really the end, and you've completed your portion of the boot. And all you have to do is then just complete it for the second one. Attach the boot itself to the suit by sewing it on, just hand sewing it, and then adding the trim over top. And I think this is a very clean look for superhero boots, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video.